President Joe Biden ran on holding Saudi Arabia accountable for the murder of Washington Post journalist Jamal Khashoggi and other various crimes. But meanwhile, the White House has released a statement condemning a Senate bill co-sponsored by Rand Paul and Bernie Sanders to block weapons sales to the country. Now, before we get to the details, let's take a trip down memory lane, all the way back to November of 2019.
Khashoggi was in fact murdered and dismembered, and I believe in the order of the Crown Prince. And I would make it very clear, we were not going to, in fact, sell more weapons to them. We were going to, in fact, make them pay the price and make them, in fact, the pariah that they are.
Whoopsie daisy, looks like Biden was caught in a fib right there, right before the American people, because his White House is now demanding that Congress allow for $650 million in missile sales to the Saudis. This is from the Office of Management and Budget. The administration strongly opposes passage of SJ Resolution 31, a joint resolution prohibiting a proposed U.S. foreign military sales case to the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia of defense articles, including 280 advanced medium-range to air missiles and related articles and services. Now, the weapons sold to the Saudis are being used in their war in Yemen, which the United States has helped them carry out. Saudi Arabia is also imposing a brutal blockade on Yemen, which is literally starving the country. According to UNICEF, 2.3 million Yemeni children are suffering from acute malnutrition as a result of the conflict, and the country's population is essentially being kept alive by humanitarian agencies. But the White House pretends as though it's in favor of diplomatic efforts to end the war in Yemen. In fact, back in February, shortly after taking office, Biden announced in a speech that he was going to end U.S. support for the Saudi war in Yemen.
President Joe Biden announced on Thursday that the U.S. would no longer support the Saudi Arabia-led military campaign in Yemen, a 6-year conflict that's been widely seen as a proxy war between Saudi Arabia and Iran.
This war has to end. And to underscore our commitment, we are ending all American support for offensive operations in the war in Yemen, including relevant arms sales.
Now, this received much fanfare at the time, and unlike, say, Afghanistan, only the real psychos are invested at all in the war in Yemen. So there was very little pushback to Biden's announcement. Many people actually celebrated the move. But the devil, as they say, is in the details. And the key word in Biden's speech was offensive. It left a lot of room for the U.S. to continue to support Saudi Arabia in any defensive initiatives against Yemen. And it's clearly by now that the whole thing was kind of BS. In the same memo condemning the congressional attempt to block weapons, the White House says the U.S. foreign military sales case at issue is fully consistent with the administration's pledge to lead with diplomacy to end the conflict in Yemen and end U.S. support for offensive operations in the war in Yemen, while also ensuring that Saudi Arabia has the means to defend itself from Iranian-backed Houthi air attacks. Now, as we know, Uncle Joe's approval rating is in pretty bad shape. So maybe he could, pay attention to how Americans feel about arming the Saudis. Data for Progress actually has the numbers on that. They found that a strong majority of voters oppose the arms sales. Now, in the end, the White House and presumably the weapons manufacturers got what they wanted. Despite efforts by some lawmakers to block the weapons sale, the Senate put an end to that. It sailed through, or it was blocked 67-30. Now, one interesting flip-flopper on this issue was Senator Chris Murphy from Connecticut. He was, for a while, one of Saudi Arabia's biggest critics in the Senate. In 2018, he partnered with Bernie Sanders in an attempt to invoke the War Powers Act and block the White House from participating in the war in Yemen. And as late as February of this year, Murphy was tweeting about suspending all weapon sales to Saudi Arabia, whether offensive or defensive. This is from a tweet in February. Not sure you read the whole article. He was responding to someone. I argue for a suspension of all weapon sales to Saudi Arabia until there is a substantial change in behavior. Well, it appears that in Chris Murphy's mind, there has been a substantial change in behavior because he voted against the resolution to block weapon sales to the Saudis. The Intercept actually talked to him, and he told The Intercept that, quote, "This is a true defensive weapons sale," he told The Intercept ahead of the vote. And with the increased pace of Houthi drones coming into Saudi territory, it's actually important for them to have the ability to shoot them. The Houthis are an Iran-backed Shia movement that pushed the Saudi-backed Yemen government out of power in 2014. Now, according to The Intercept's, that article in The Intercept, Murphy's comments repeat State Department arguments that the 280 Raytheon-built advanced medium-range air-to-air missiles, or AMRAAMs, which will be used on Saudi Arabia's fighter jets, are defensive in nature. Opponents of the sale have rejected that characterization, insisting that the weapon empowers the Saudis to maintain their blockade of Yemeni ports. The labeling of the missiles as defensive, though, permits the White House to claim the sale complies with President Joe Biden's policy earlier this year to forbid U.S. support for offensive operations in Yemen. Now, this resolution to block the weapons sale was introduced by Senator Bernie Sanders, and it was co-sponsored by Senators Rand Paul and Mike Lee. And here is Bernie Sanders explaining why supporting the Saudis' war in Yemen is such an unbelievable disaster.
We should be demanding that they end the devastating war in Yemen, which has killed over 230,000 people in one of the very poorest countries on earth. For more than 6 years, the Saudi-led military intervention in Yemen's civil war has been a key driver of the largest humanitarian disaster in the world, the largest. According to UNICEF, 4 out of every 5 children in Yemen needs humanitarian assistance. That is over 11 million children. 400,000 children suffer from severe malnutrition. 1.7 million children have been displaced from their homes by violence from this war. And some 15 million people, more than half of whom are children, do not have access to safe water, sanitation, or hygiene.
It really is just absolutely brutal. So why does this happen? Well, redistribution of wealth from U.S. taxpayers to private defense contractors, essentially. It is basically the number one job of any U.S. president. According to Open Secrets, in the past 2 decades, defense contractors and their extensive network of lobbyists and donors have directed $285 million in campaign contributions and $2.5 billion in lobbying spending to influence defense policy. To further these goals, they hired more than 200 lobbyists who have worked in the same government that regulates and decides funding for the industry. Biden appointed some of the best industry goons to his administration. According to Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin and Secretary of State Anthony Blinken consulted for a private equity firm that emphasizes its access, network, and expertise in the defense industry. Austin also had a seat on the United Technologies and Raytheon boards, earning more than $250,000 from the now merged companies. Saudi Arabia benefits from the influence wielded by major U.S. arms manufacturers that would like to sell to them. Just 4 of the biggest companies received 90% of promised sales between 2009 and 2019. Those 4, Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, General Dynamics, and Boeing, happen to make up 4 of the top 5 defense-related companies spending the most on lobbying, pouring over $10 million each into their policy influencing efforts in 2020 alone. Now, since Biden's inauguration, the State Department also approved an $85 million sale of Raytheon manufactured missiles to Chile and $60 million worth of Lockheed Martin's F-16 aircraft and services to Jordan. So take a step back and think about how vitriolic our politics are at the moment, how much yelling and shouting there is about all manner of nonsense, while this kind of thing just quietly floats under the radar as Democrats and Republicans work hand in hand to continue the money train flowing for the national security state. In fact, just this week, Congress passed a new defense budget, $768 billion to be exact. That's just for 1 year. The legislation just sailed through Congress with huge bipartisan majority of 363 ayes to just 70 nays, with nary a debate in the media or anywhere else, really. According to the New York Times, the legislation, unveiled hours before the vote, put the Democratic-led Congress on track to increase the Pentagon's budget by roughly $24 billion above what President Biden had requested, angering anti-war progressives who had hoped that their party's control of the White House and both houses of Congress would lead to cuts to military programs after decades of growth. Whoops, that didn't happen. Now, Biden, if you recall, pulled out of Afghanistan, which was a genuinely good thing. But even though we officially ended America's longest war, somehow the budgets and the costs, they still go up. and this may be a small thing, but it annoys me so much that the media always uses the yearly budget number when it talks about the defense bills while using the much larger 10-year ticket price for social spending bills. But I digress, because seeing the Build Back Better plan get nickel and dimed into oblivion while defense spending magically just goes up every year. I mean, it's a cliche at this point to point out that no one asks how we're going to pay for it when it comes to defense, but it's just true. It's a monstrosity that we're asked to maintain this massive, bloated, bumbling empire while people starve at home. And it's even worse that we have to help in the starving of the people in Yemen by supporting Saudi Arabia, no matter what.
It's also not helpful for Biden and the Democratic Party to renege on most of their promises, right? I mean, I think it's such a good idea to tie in the nickel and diming that's happening right now in regard to the Biden agenda, you know, the Build Back Better agenda, while at the same time increasing the budget for defense, which is incredibly unnecessary, just breezes on through with no problem. And people are paying attention to that, you know, and what frustrates me about every election cycle where the Democratic Party loses and they lose big is they then turn around, refuse to take personal responsibility for reneging on their promises, and then they just blame progressives, right? They'll blame the honestly mostly powerless progressive caucus within Congress. But the other thing I wanted to mention is, you know, Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin, I was like raising alarm over his appointment from the very beginning because of the fact that he had such cozy ties to the private defense industry. And all you would see in the media was, oh, this is historic. He's African-American.
Yeah.
And it goes back to the issue that we were talking about last week, right? The issue of class versus race. And I think oftentimes when that debate rages on, there's this like thought process of, well, you're denying that racism exists in the country. It exists. It's not a denial of it. But when you're talking about just creating this illusion of diversity, it's just about like the optics, right? It's not about changing the system in place that's actually creating more and more brutality, not just here in the United States, but across the world, right? So Lloyd Austin being Black is not that important when you consider his substance and what he stands for. And it's incredibly insulting to, I think, any race when you treat people as if they're just interchangeable, right?
Yeah.
Great. I would love to have a defense secretary who is a person of color, but I would also like someone who represents the right things, who actually wants to make real changes so we're not carrying out, you know, brutality across the globe. So that part of the story really stood out to me as well. Anyway.
Yeah, you know, Tired is getting a Black guy to run the Pentagon. Wired is abolishing the Pentagon altogether. But yeah, that no, it's. I mean, when you talk about stories like this, and you see things like what happened this week with the defense bill. I mean, it is crazy that, you know, Biden's asking for money to spend at home, and he gets less than half of what he wanted or whatever, or even more. Then he asks for money to blow up people abroad, and they give him more than he asked for. I mean, it just feeds into this kind of cynicism of that there's just very little you can do in the current political moment. That you voted the Democrats, they take power, and this is what we get: just an increasing defense budget with austerity at home. Right. That there's just no real change on that front, that the empire just kind of gets bigger and bigger, dumber and dumber, more violent than ever, but, you know, more expensive than ever. And that the situation at home just gets worse and worse. So it really is. And I'm not saying that there's like an easy way out of this kind of trap. But there is such bipartisan agreement on this that it's just like, it just shows you how far away we are from real political power or real political change in the near term. Like the fact that this kind of thing just sails through and like no one even talks about it. Like the media barely talks about it. I mean, think about like how much more they talk about other things, like and often not necessarily like unimportant things, but like think about the coverage that like the Texas abortion thing got. Like, of course, that's a big deal, and like,
yeah,
I'm not I'm
I
not
think
like
a better
denying-
example of something that got an insane amount of coverage, and I think it just every time Marjorie Taylor Greene or
Opens her
someone like
mouth.
her
Yeah.
says something stupid or
Yeah.
like, I mean, they're stupid and dangerous people,
Yes.
but like they get disproportionate coverage compared
Yeah.
to just all of these other issues. And I do think like the Supreme Court, you know, there could be 22 states that completely outlaw abortion altogether
Oh, yeah.
as a result of like so I do think that story is important, but there are just a litany of other issues that are like harped on. The Ilhan Omar, Lauren Boebert thing,
I don't even know what
that was
happened there. Like,
it was
I
like
don't
a
even know.
multi-day news cycle.
I know.
And yeah,
I
I'm not
didn't even know what
minimizing
happened there.
it, but I'm a little bit minimizing it. Like it
No,
didn't
and-
need to be a multi-day news cycle.
I didn't want to come off as suggesting that the Supreme Court thing on abortion wasn't a big deal. Like, I think it is a big deal, but I think that there's, from a media standpoint, they cover it because it is kind of this kind of, it fits neatly into the culture war, right?
Mhm.
That when something fits neatly into the culture war, it will get covered. If it does not fit neatly into the culture war, it will not get covered. And sometimes the issues are important, like in the case of the Supreme Court, but sometimes they're unimportant, like when Lauren Boebert says that Ilhan Omar is like like a towel head or something, or whatever. I don't even know what she said.
Like the jihad squad, part of the jihad
Oh,
squad.
nice. Yeah. That's a good one. Yeah. But this, like, 800, like almost $800 billion, which is like a giant chunk of the federal budget, the overall federal budget, which could be used for all, it could transform this country if it was used for social spending. Like, it really could, like it would absolutely transform this country. That just is, it's just like whoop, yep, just out the door. Let's do it. Nothing, no discussion on it at all. If you enjoyed this video from Jacobin Weekends, please hit like and subscribe. That way, you'll enjoy all of our backlog, as well as all of our future content, including interviews, live streams, and clips. Thank you.